Hello, equity agents, and thank you for tuning in. Today, we are going to be talking about backup offers. Been getting quite a bit of questions on backup offers again, mostly from the buy side perspective. But in this video, we'll talk about also the listing side perspective as well, and just generally how to structure a backup offer and some of the nuances that come with them. So starting off on the buy side, I'll set the scene, the scenario. You write an offer on a home for your buyer, one that they truly love so much, and that offer doesn't get accepted, unfortunately. The seller and the listing agent have accepted another offer, but you might get a phone call from that listing agent that says, hey, your offer was really close. We would love for you to submit a backup offer, and we'll keep you in the background in the event that first buyer on the property terminates or falls through for any reason. And you would be surprised at how many backup offers do get moved into the first position, especially right now in this market when there are a lot of contracts that are terminating for one reason or another, whether it's the seller doesn't want to negotiate or the inspection process was too burdensome for the buyer. We're seeing a lot of backup offers being moved into the first position. So this is a great reason to use them for your buyer. So there are 4 key concepts when structuring a backup offer. And number 1 is to include the Frascona backup offer position clause that the Frascona law firm has drafted. And then you also want to include M.E.C dates and deadlines, mutual execution of contract. We'll talk about those in greater detail. Then you want to define when those M.E.C dates and deadlines actually begin, which we'll talk about. And last but not least, you want to remember that if the seller accepts your backup offer, you are officially under contract. And in the event that your buyer wants to write an offer on another property, you do need to submit a notice to terminate on that backup offer. That's a detail a lot of people forget. So let's dive into these items in a little bit more detail so we can structure a backup offer. So number 1, including the Frascona backup position clause. This kind of sets the scene for what we're dealing with here. And you can find the backup position clause in CTM right above the additional provisions box. You can click this orange link, and that pulls up all of the Frascona clauses that we have included in your guys' CTM accounts. And if you scroll down, you're going to choose the backup position clauses. This inserts 3 different clauses into your contract. You'll notice it said choose one. And my recommendation is to use the 3rd clause as it's the most comprehensive to protect your buyer. So let's read through this really quick just so you can see what we're doing. So it says buyer in backup position. Seller is currently obligated to sell the property under the contract dated X date, the first contract. So in other words, the seller accepted an offer. They need to see that offer through, and you would need to reach out to the listing agent to figure out the date on that contract that's currently in the first position. So you can plug that in there. That's how you are able to set these 2 offers apart when you're analyzing all the details back there in CTM. It goes on to read, seller's obligation to close this contract, your offer, is contingent upon the buyer under the first contract acknowledging the first contract's termination in writing. Meaning the seller doesn't have to do anything with your offer until they know the buyer of the first contract has officially terminated in writing. That's the catalyst that kind of kicks off this backup position clause. It then reads, seller reserves the right to extend any deadlines or otherwise modify the first contract without affecting this contingency or this contract. That just means, again, the seller and the buyer on the first contract, they have the right to see that transaction through. They can amend the dates and deadlines. They can change the terms of that first contract. It doesn't affect your backup offer. So the seller and that first buyer, they have the right to see that contract through just like they would in any other transaction. So then it reads, and this is an important sentence, buyer has the right, that's your buyer in this backup position, buyer has the right to terminate under this paragraph and section 24.1 at any time prior to receiving notice of the termination of the first contract from the seller. So that just means your buyer, in the event you do get accepted and you're put into the backup position here, your buyer can terminate this backup offer if they do find another home, if they don't want to wait around anymore. That last sentence about termination is not included in the other backup position clauses. And so that's why it's important to use that third clause as kind of the standard for this backup position. So yes, that's what you would first include in the additional provisions of your contract to kind of tell that seller, hey, we know you have a first contract. You're going to see that transaction through, but in the event that it terminates, you're going to notify us in writing and move us into the first position. And then you're there. You're in the first position, and your buyer gets to move forward and purchase that property. So the next topic, M.E.C. dates and deadlines, which again, that stands for mutual execution of the contract, when the buyer and seller both agree that this contract is in full force. It's moved into the first position. So to set the scene, on that very first offer that you might have submitted to the listing agent that was rejected, chances are you included physical calendar dates in your dates and deadlines table. For example, August 22nd for the earnest money deposit date, August 30th for the inspection objection deadline. You're using physical calendar dates for your dates and deadlines. Well, in a backup offer, you don't want to include physical calendar deadlines, because what if you don't get moved into the first position, until 2-3 months from now, and all of those dates and deadlines that you've already structured have passed. They just don't make sense anymore. So instead, what you would want to do is use M.E.C. dates and deadlines. So rather than a calendar date, you include a number, so 3 days from M.E.C. For example, earnest money deadline would be 3 days from M.E.C. Inspection objection would be 10 days from M.E.C. That's a way that you structure your dates and deadlines so the seller and the listing agent can kind of see how quickly the dates and deadlines will move when you do get moved into the first position. And if you need help on those M.E.C. dates and deadlines, don't forget about our interactive contract to buy and sell back there in Elevate under the How-Tos section. We use M.E.C. dates and deadlines just to give you guys an overview of how those dates and deadlines should fall for a typical 30 to 40 day closing. So you can pull that up side by side, count out the days on a calendar, and then put that number, the M.E.C. date and deadline, in there. One other detail about those M.E.C. dates and deadlines, since you have an offer that you submitted to the listing agent that wasn't accepted, a quick little trick in CTM. Under your contract in CTM, you can duplicate the original contract, which preserves all of the information, all of the terms, all of the text that you've included in that first offer. It wipes the signatures, and then it allows you to modify dates and deadlines or any other verbiage. That way you have all of your offer intact, and then you can just quickly modify. You count those dates and deadlines out on a calendar and add the M.E.C. dates and deadlines before resubmitting the backup offer to the listing agent. So quick little tip there. So the next little detail that runs along with that is you have to define when those M.E.C. dates and deadlines take place. And so the verbiage that you're going to put in your additional provisions is this. M.E.C. dates and deadlines are defined as when seller notifies buyer in writing that this backup offer has been moved into the first position. So in other words, all of those M.E.C. dates and deadlines, they are not even going to start ticking until the seller notifies the buyer in writing that that first contract has terminated, and now your buyer is moved up into that first position. The backup offer has been moved into the first position. That's when those dates and deadlines start ticking. And so in writing, what does that mean? If the seller sends an email, or if the listing agent sends an email to the buyer's agent saying, hey, the first contract terminated, here's the notice to terminate, and we're officially moving you guys up to the first position, that would count as in writing. That's the seller notifying the buyer in writing that the first contract is terminated. The listing agent could also complete an amend extend to your offer saying, hey, first contract terminated, we're moving you guys into the first position. And that's where you can restructure those dates and deadlines in the event that you need to, if you wanted to plug in calendar days. Otherwise, M.E.C. dates and deadlines, they're not going to start ticking because you've included that verbiage until you're notified that your backup offer is moved into the first position. And finally, a detail that's overlooked a lot of times with backup offers. Sometimes you might be in the backup position for months or a month, and you might forget, and your buyer gets excited and finds another property, and they say, we need to submit an offer on that other property right away. Well, don't forget, you are under contract. A backup offer is accepted just like any other contract, and there is an obligation to fulfill those duties in the event that you do get moved into the first position. So in order to do things the right way, before your buyer writes another offer on another property, you would need to submit a notice to terminate prior to the seller or the listing agent telling you that you've moved into the first position. The last thing we want to do is write another offer on a property only to then shortly after receive a note from the seller saying, first contract terminated, we're moving you into the first position. And now your buyer might be on the line to purchase 2 properties. So don't forget that detail. We don't want to put a buyer in that position. We want to make sure we terminate that backup offer before we write an offer on another property. And that's kind of what that last sentence in the Frascona backup position clause is referencing. Buyer can terminate as long as it's before the seller tells them that they're in first position. So those are the big nuances of structuring a backup offer. And again, you'd be surprised at how many contracts in the backup position do get moved into the first position and make it to the closing table. So definitely give that a try. If your buyer is adamant about that property, they want it, you never know what could happen. So let's kind of shift gears to the listing side. And why might you want to accept a backup offer when you're under contract on a listing? Well, the short answer is a backup offer is great leverage for a seller. And that's kind of one distinction, is that, buyer's agents, a savvy buyer's agent knows that if the listing agent is looking for a backup offer, it's most likely for leverage on that first contract during the inspection negotiations. And to give you an idea here, on the first contract, and you represent the seller, maybe you're in the inspection negotiation milestones, and this buyer is kind of wishy-washy about some of the inspection repairs that have come up during the inspection process. A nice tactic is that as the listing agent, you can tell that buyer's agent of the first contract, look, I've got another buyer right in the background in backup position. They've kind of already informed me that they're not too worried about these X, Y, or Z issues that you're asking us to fix in your inspection objection. That's a great negotiation technique. That tells the other buyer, ooh, there's somebody in the backup position. Maybe that foundation crack doesn't scare me as much as I thought, and we better move forward. Great leverage to use as a negotiation tactic to have a backup offer in place. Another question that comes up is that allowable? Is that dishonest? And the answer is no, because when you're representing the seller, you're looking out for their best interest. You're going to do anything and everything you can to get them the highest and best terms. And as an extra blanket there is a chance that first offer might terminate. And it truly is nice to have somebody in the second position that you can just quickly, I love the little emojis. Too funny. There is a chance that you can move that buyer in the backup position into the first position. It's nice to have that reassurance that there's somebody right behind the scenes who might take over in the event that first contract terminates. So just a little side note that as a buyer's agent, when you write a backup offer, just know that you might be being used if you write a backup offer. But again, things happen all the time. It might be in your buyer's best interest to do that backup offer, to submit that backup offer, because then they're right there. They might be moved into the first position. So back on track, that was a little side tangent. When you're the listing agent and you're interested in accepting a backup offer, there's 2 ways to proceed, and we've covered kind of one of them. The first is to have the buyer's agent submit an all-new offer. So they do what we just talked about on the buy side. They duplicate their original offer. You'd kind of coach them through, hey, please include M.E.C dates and deadlines. Please include this Frascona clause. You can copy and paste it to them if they don't have that Frascona clause. A lot of brokerages do have their own backup position clauses that the buyer's agent might put in their offer. But if you want to be in more control, you can send that to them. and they'll walk through all the same things we just reviewed on the buy side. They'll explain what M.E.C dates and deadlines mean, and then they'll resubmit that offer with all those revisions. You accept it, and then boom, you're under contract with the backup offer in the second position. That's usually the preferred way because it's just clean to have an all new contract. But the second option is, as the listing agent, you could create a counter proposal and basically accomplish the same thing. In your counter proposal, you would copy and paste that Frascona backup offer position clause into your counter proposal with a little note that states, buyer and seller agree to revise the dates and deadlines of this offer when seller notifies buyer in writing that they've been moved into the first position. So you can kind of see what we're doing. We're connecting the dots. You're basically just saying we're going to put you in the backup position. Your dates and deadlines might not make sense when that day comes. So when we do notify you in writing that you've been moved into the first position, we'll do an amend extend and revise those dates and deadlines so they make sense. So those are your two options. So that answers probably 90% of the questions that I get on backup offers. I hope this video has been helpful. Of course, backup offers can get a little bit confusing, and there might be some other circumstances to the transaction that we actually need to have a conversation about. So as always, please don't hesitate. You can always contact us through our support line or through the support line email. We are happy to review your contract and kind of coach you through these mechanisms over the phone or in person. But this is just the general overview in hopes that it helps you draft your backup offer if needed. So again, thanks for tuning in. We will see you in the next video. And as always, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care.